Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockersclub. It's always cool when you get to see a brand new design, a brand new case, fresh release, and that's exactly what this is from Fractal Design. This is the Meshify S2. Now if you're familiar with Fractal Design, you know they already have a Meshify C series, so it'll be really interesting to see where this takes the Meshify to the next level, how that works. So let's get out of the box and take a look. So we got the S2, the Meshify S2 out of the box. What Fractal Design has really done here, they've taken two existing cases and they sort of combined them into one. And they started with the Meshify C, which is an existing case. They took the style and design of that and sort of combined that with the Define S2, the functionality and the features of that case. And we end up with the Meshify S2. So I already got the protective plastic off of the glass in the front there. And we'll go over the exterior features and the interior features. But I wanted to talk about some of the things first before we really tear into it. And what we've got here, if we look at the front, and I'll have to get a close-up view, but there's an angular, like a stealth look to the front of it. And if you get it in the light just right, it's easier to see. Since it's black, it's sort of hard to tell sometimes. But we've got the tempered glass side panel, and it has no fasteners. It's bolt free. And usually on most of the tempered glass ones that I've seen, you've got a fastener at each corner. So you take the fasteners off and you take the glass off. Well, here we've got a smooth, streamlined look here. No fasteners at all. We've got USB 3.1, a single port up here on top. We'll look at that a little closer. And then we've got massive water cooling support for up to 420 millimeters on the top. If you want to put a radiator that big, that's like putting basically an aircraft carrier across the top. We've got 360 millimeter support for front radiator, and we have 280 millimeter bottom support. So if you want to put a large radiator in the bottom, you can do that. Of course, in the rear, you've got 120 millimeter rear radiator support. We have a full length, we'll get the glass off here, but we have a full length power supply shroud. It covers everything, which really goes a long way when you're trying to keep your cable management looking nice and clean. We've got 3 dynamic X2 140 millimeter fans. We've got 2 in the front. Again, I'll get this panel out where you can see it. And there's 1 in the rear for the rear exhaust. We've got 5 concealed drive mounts. We also have removable top cooling bracket. I'll get this mesh panel off the top so you can see that also. We have dedicated fill port locations if you want to go with a liquid cooling system, not the regular all-in-one, but if you want to go with the modular system that you build or you custom assemble. We've got included SATA power extension cable. We'll look at that. We also have the adjustable reservoir brackets. Again, if you go with a more complex water cooling system. We have pre-drilled pump mounts. We also have support for the Flex VRC25. What that is, if you look, you've got your horizontal expansion slots here from your motherboard. And usually your video cards, cards, if you have more than one, go into these slots. But we have the ability here, and there's a little cable you have to buy it separately, but that will allow you to mount your video card here vertically off to the side. So this case obviously is wide enough to support that. So now I'll go ahead and start getting the panels off here. We can look at things in a little more detail. We can take a little closer look at the I/O panel there. Of course, we have the headphone, microphone, and the USB Type-C port right there. Power switch, restart button. And then we have 2 USB 2.0 ports there. And then looking at the front, you can see the angular, sort of a stealthy appearance that's a carryover from the Meshify C. So that really looks nice there. And then at the bottom, we have a very nice and very long, full-length bottom filter panel there that can be removed. And then you can blow it out, get the dust out. That keeps any dust from being sucked in from the bottom of the case, and we'll see why that's so important here when we get the case opened up. The whole front panel here pops off quite conveniently. Before I do that, I do want to point out this mesh panel comes out for cleaning. It comes out very easily. Now initially I thought that this little nameplate here, it kind of pushes in. I thought it might have been a quick release, but it's actually not. That's just the way it's mounted. To get it, you actually have to pull the front panel off here. And then the entire panel comes off. Now, it is still retained here by the wiring harnesses there that go to the I/O panel. So you got to be careful when you pull that off. But down at the bottom here, there is actually a little release, and you push that up with your thumb. We'll see a little better here in a moment. There we go, and the entire front panel here pops right out. So you can flip it around there and you can blow all the dust out or wash it out, however you want to do it. And then you can see here on the frame, down here at the bottom is where it sort of clips in. So what you'll do is, there are two notches. There's a notch here and a notch there. And the panel here has two little catches. So when you put it back in, you just line it up at the top and then snap it in at the bottom. But before I do that, we'll take a look at the front in a little more detail here. Again, being very careful. I pull that out of the way. But you can see we have two of the 140 millimeter cooling fans. There's actually room for 3 fans in the front. You can go with 3 140 millimeter or 3 120 millimeter fans, if you like. And the fans that are included, there are 3 of them. They're the Dynamic X2 140 millimeter fans. Comes with 2 of them mounted up front, and then there's actually, put this out of the way here, there's actually one mounted here in the back of the case. So there's your rear exhaust fan too. So use the same 3 fans. Now we'll go ahead and get the side glass off. Now I'll go ahead and get the panel off on the side. Now these are push to lock panels, and if you've never dealt with those, they can be a little tricky at first. They can catch you off guard, so you want to be a little careful. Now, from the factory, you have the typical fasteners here, 1 at each corner, and those are to keep the panels in shipment from falling off. Now you can still use them if you like for a little additional security, but the claim to fame here on these push to lock, and you got to be a little careful. Now these are a little stiff since the case is brand new. But you got to be a little careful. It is tempered glass and very strong. But if you haven't taken this off a few times, it actually hinges at the front there. So if you put it back on, it sort of catches in the front, and then you rock the back in. And then the little detents here at the back corner, little detents push into the little receivers there, and you can feel it click when it locks in. And the back panel is all metal, and it's essentially the same thing. You take the fasteners out. You can leave them out because the push to locks hold them in. And pops off at the top. Again, it's just a little stiff because it's brand new. And then we pop it off at the bottom, and then the whole panel comes off, and it's secured the same way. It's got the little ledge there that hinges, sort of hinges in the front. So to put it back on, you put it in the front there and then pop those in and you're done. So I really like that. Never seen a case that had that feature. Before this one, and then looking inside, we have the full power supply shroud. Now, some people really like these and some people don't, because if you do have a real nice high-end power supply, you can't really show it off quite as well with the shroud in there. However, the shroud does go a long way to making your cable routing really clean and nice. One more quick look at the front there. You do have support radiator-wise. We can go 120, 140, 240, 280, and 360. And if you go with a 140 or a 280, you've got a maximum width of 147 millimeters, just so you know. And then here's how the front panel goes in. Again, we have these 2 little tabs. They go into those notches, and then you push it in from the bottom. So now we're looking along the top of the case. There's the very large mesh filter panel that goes along the top. And if you want to remove it, it's very easy, because they put a little button here at the back of the case. You just push that in, and the panel releases and pops right up. Very convenient. And this is similar construction to the front panel. We've got our foam sort of trapped in there, and that makes it very easy and convenient to remove and clean. Get the dust out of it. This here is your top cooling bracket. Now, there are 4 screws. I've already taken the screws out to make this a little faster, but this bracket pops up and removes, allowing easy and much needed access to the inside of the case from the top. And if you've ever built a system before, you know that getting that power plug for the CPU power up here from the top corner can be a real pain. That's if the case even has a hole or a provision which this one certainly does right there. It can be quite a challenge though, because a lot of times there's just not much top clearance. So that really makes case building a lot easier. Back to the bracket. This the convenient thing with this also is you can mount your radiator and fans to it ahead of time and just drop that thing in there, go ahead and reinstall your screws, and you are ready to go. And we also have the convenient fill ports, so if you have a custom water loop, you don't even have to open the case up other than popping the top panel off, and you saw how easy that was. As far as radiator support, we can go all the way up to a 420 millimeter radiator. But if you don't want to go that large, it does support a 120, 140, 240, 280, 360, and again, all the way up to a 420 millimeter aircraft runway radiator. Now, again, with the 140 and the 280 and the 420, if you do go with that size, you do have to watch a little bit here. You are limited to 35 millimeter. It's a little hard to show, but when your motherboard is in here, your components will stick off of the motherboard. You really don't want to go any higher than 35 millimeters when you're running a 140, 280, or a 420 millimeter radiator. You don't have that restriction if you go with a 120, 240, or 360. So that's looking at everything from the top. And we can just pop that top panel in. Now we're looking at the bottom of the case. I flipped the case over so we can see what's going on underneath. One thing I like is we have some very thick, nice rubber feet or vibration isolators. These keep the case from sliding around on the floor, and if you do slide it around, you won't scratch your floor up. And then of course, this is the very large, full-length bottom filter panel there, which is easily removable for cleaning. And then that reveals the mounting provisions and the vent panels for fans or liquid cooling if you want to put a radiator in the bottom. Of course, it would go in from this side here. But looking from the bottom, you can see we can put a couple of 120 millimeter fans, a couple of 140 millimeter fans. And radiator-wise, you can go with 120, 140, 280, or 240. And then the back vented panel here, now we don't have any mounting provisions for a fan, but you wouldn't put a fan there anyway because that's the fresh air intake for your power supply. So that's looking at the bottom. Looking inside the case, there's just a ton of room. You could just drive a bus through there sideways. I love these sawtooth grommets here. Those are nice. And we've got 1, 2, 3 large ones and then 2 little small ones at the top. It's a little dark in there, but there are 2 small ones. So taking a look at the accessory box or the hardware box, usually these things just contain your hardware for installing your motherboard and some zip ties. They're not terribly exciting, but this one has something that caught my eye. It says SATA power extension cable. And what that is for is when you have hard drives installed in these 3 positions here, what you've got is a special dedicated connector, and we've got 3 identical little SATA plugs there, little SATA connectors that will go to your hard drives. So you'll get a nice clean installation. So these 3 will attach to your 3 hard drives, and then we take 1 connector back to your power supply. So you end up with a much cleaner cable routing. So your install looks a lot nicer. As far as your hard drive mounting options go, on the back of the case here, behind the motherboard, we have these 2 little attachments that are for your solid-state drive. So you can attach your solid-state drive to this. It's got the 4 little mounting provisions there for the screws. And then this just drops into position, and then you tighten the little thumb screw there. And that's where 2 solid-state drives can mount. If you don't want to put them there, you can detach these, and inside here, it might be a little hard to see, but there are actually 2 little places where you can drop these little brackets in there, and you could mount your solid-state drives here. So you could put 2 of the solid-state drives there. Looking back here again, for your 3.5-inch drives, we have the option of using these little hard drive cages which just happened to have provisions also for solid state drives. So you could put up to 5 solid state drives or 3 of your regular 3.5 inch drives using this cage. And looking here, back inside, another thing, actually earlier I mentioned that to get this front filter panel out you had to remove the front fascia. Well, that's not really true. I was wrong about that. You do have to remove the bottom filter panel, but then that opens a little gap here and you can put your fingers in there and this filter panel just pops right out. So you do not have to take the front fascia off like I said before. What I do want to point out is if you're going to put a large radiator in the front and you need some space here cleared out, there are 2 screws, and I already took the screws out, but you have to pop the front fascia off to get to those screws. And then after the front fascia is out of the way, you can remove those screws. And when you remove those screws, it allows you to get this plate out of the way. And what that does is that opens up all this space here, and you can put your radiator in. If you don't want to use a tall radiator, a 360 millimeter that fills the whole area, you can put a smaller radiator, and if you want to slide it down, then you'll need this space open there for your radiator and fan. So that's really what that's for. This little circuit board here is the Nexus PWM fan hub, and what this does is it provides short circuit protection and power regulation that protects the components from voltage and current spikes without losing any power to your coolers that are connected. What we have here first is the SATA connector. This is what you'll connect to your power supply. Provides power to the hub, and then in with the harness here there's a little 4-pin fan connector, and this is what you'll connect to the one of the fan headers on your motherboard, and that'll provide the fan control to all these different connectors. And on this side we have 6 of the 3-pin fans, fan headers. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and on this side we have 3 of the 4-pin connectors. So your PWM fans, your 4-pin fans will go on this side. And PWM stands for pulse width modulation, which is a better, more precise way of controlling your fan speed. And now we're ready to go ahead and get the test system built up, do some thermal testing. One thing I did want to point out, I didn't mention earlier, these vertical slots here in the back, those are for these little brackets here that come in the hardware kit. And that is for a reservoir. If you do a custom water loop, you can mount these back here to support the reservoir, and they can slide up and down for adjustment. And the other thing, I'm not going to be using a 3.5 inch drive, but if I were, the hardware kit also includes these little rubber dampeners, vibration dampeners, and they go inside the little holes here. If I'm going to be using a 3.5 inch drive, which I won't be, but these are included. So with the top open now, the build should go much more smoothly. Now we have the system powered up, and you can see right here the power light kind of shines through the mesh there, sort of peeks through. So when the system is on, you will see that light. Looking over here inside the case, I had to take the glass off because there's just too much reflection. You can't see what's going on inside, but you can see there's plenty of room over here if you did want to go with a custom loop. That's where the reservoir would go. Room for the pump down there. And up at the top, it's a little dark, but you can see there is plenty of room for a radiator and fans if you went with a top cooling system. And again, at the bottom, if you put a lower radiator in or fans in the bottom below the shroud or behind the shroud, this panel here, you would want to take that out for a lower radiator. And then this whole section here is ventilated so you can get air circulation through there. Now also in the bottom there's a piece that is sold separately. It is called a PCIe riser. It's the VRC25. And what that does, it allows you to take your video card, your graphics card, and flip it up and mount it vertically. So it uses these two vertical slots. And then that separate piece, basically there are two screw holes already made to the shroud top, and that piece screws down here, secures down, and then your video card can flip up vertically. But that is sold separately. Okay, so let's get some thermal imaging here. This is idle, no load across the top there. We've got a little warm spot at the back, and that is of course right above where the cooler is. Of course we're getting a lot of reflection there off of the glass. Looking across the front panel there. And then we'll look at the back of the case. Again, this is no overclock. This is idle. There's the back exhaust fan. Down here we've got the graphics card. And then at the very bottom is the power supply. So now we'll put an overclock to it. And now we've got the overclock cranked up. You can see the case is fairly cool, except when we get toward the back there. Of course, that's where the CPU cooler is, where the exhaust heat tends to accumulate. And then look at the front. And then around the side, again, we've got reflections, so you can see me walking by. And then we look at the back here. Of course, this is where all of our exhaust air is coming out. Graphics card, and then the power supply down here at the bottom. And what I'll do now is pop the side off. So I went ahead and took the side off. Now this won't really tell you anything about the airflow in the case. Since the side is off, that kind of messes up the whole airflow path. But this just shows you where the heat is being generated in the case. And there's the large Noctua D14 cooler. So the heat, of course, is pushed through the cooler and then exits through the back of the case. Just a little side note here is I have something I call my case bitch list, and it's actually a list of things that really get on your nerves when you're trying to put your system together. You wonder why they designed it a certain way, why didn't they design it a certain way. And I'm happy to say the Meshify S2 did not make the bitch list. I really couldn't find anything to complain about. Some examples of things, though, that often make the bitch list are USB ports that are mounted on the front. Now, there's nothing wrong with them being mounted on the front, but when you plug in, especially a large flash drive or anything that plugs in that sticks out, you can snag it with your knee or a coat or a dress, anything like that. When they're on top here, you're less likely to do that, so I really like that. The next thing is the grommets. I like the grommet placement, especially with an extended ATX or an eATX. It's long enough that you can use 90-degree SATA cables that will just drop right down straight through the grommets. That is a nice feature. Back here on the power supply, I like the way the power supply attaches here separately. So you unscrew these fasteners and the whole power supply just pulls right out. And it just makes the installation of the power supply so much easier. You push it in there and then you attach these. You lock them down and your power supply is secure. You don't have to shove it in from the side. It can go in from the back. Now the other thing here is cable management. Now you might notice this cable, the way I've got it laid out here, the cables kind of look like a train wreck. That's because they are. I don't put much time into cable management really because I'm tearing these systems down about as fast as I build them, and there's not much sense in spending the time to make them all pretty, so I don't. Anyway, what I like is Fractal Design made this case deep enough that I can actually get all my cables stashed in there. If you've got a modular power supply, it's not such a big deal because you only use the cables that you have to, and the others you just leave unplugged. But since this is a non-modular power supply, all these other cables are going along for the ride, which means the extra space is all the more necessary. So an extra deep case here for cable management. I can get all my cables in there and I can actually get the side door closed. So that's it for the bitch list. or I should say things that did not make the bitch list. Well, the thermal testing showed that the Meshify S2, even with stock fans, the two 140mm fans in the front and the single 140mm fan in the rear, really moves enough air to keep the case cool. If you want, you can of course add another fan in the front. You've got space in the bottom for fans and space along the whole top for extra fans if you really want to move a lot of air. So I would say this case is fine for overclocking. You shouldn't have any issues. Some of the features that I really like this top panel. Push the button in the back, pops right out for easy cleaning. You can get to everything in the top if you need to. You can even pop this guy out of the way here and you can have access to your motherboard power plug there, which a lot of cases do not have that, and it can be quite a challenge. We got the front panel actually up here. This pops out very easily for cleaning, and we have the bottom one, the full length bottom filter panel pops out. We've got the push to lock sides here that are really nice. They give you a streamlined look because there are no external fasteners. It pops right out and pops right back in. Same thing with the metal panel on the back side here. We do have support for a vertical GPU. There's a special part you have to purchase separately. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to show that off. Maybe sometime in the future I can do that. The other thing that I really like about this case is we have our USB 3.1 Gen 2 support, and we have two USB 3.0 ports. So this case comes in around $149. I think that's a decent price for what you get. You really do get a lot with this case. So this is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.